So, I hear you want to visit your LGS and join a tournament, but you're not sure what formats are what, and what cards you even can play in those formats. Well, you're in luck. My name is Ashen Wings, and I will be telling you everything you need to know about the Magic the Gathering paper formats that are most common at your LGS.
Welcome on in Dragonfolk to the introduction of paper formats for Magic the Gathering. So, a lot of people are getting into Magic the Gathering and they're starting to go to their LGS or their local game store. And I kind of wanted to go over a little bit of stuff because there is a lot of different ways to play Magic the Gathering. This is definitely going to be a video for beginners. The Magic the Gathering for Beginners page that I'm a part of on Facebook, mainly for them for the most part, but I plan to do this just for the general populace because with every new player that comes in, I see people try to play Commander cards in Standard or in Pioneer. Certain banned cards that people don't know are banned. So generally, I want to get the idea across so that way everybody has a better understanding of these things. Now, let's start by explaining what a paper format is. Paper formats are a type of game style you will find people playing with physical cards from various Magic the Gathering sets. So, the physical, actual... I don't know how I don't have cards just lying around. Like, physical cards. Like, actual physical cards. That's what people mean when they say paper. Because paper is not digital. That's pretty self-explanatory, I think. But these formats are usually what's played at local game stores, right, or LGSs. I do also call them LGSs. So LGSs are... If you ever hear anybody say LGS, that's exactly what they're meaning. Now, an LGS will usually hold events or some kind of tournament just to kind of get people in, or even casual game nights, right? If people just want to come in and have a good time playing a certain format, hanging out with their friends, then this is going to be the place to do it, is at your LGS. You can find them on Google. There should be tons of card shops. Hopefully you have one near you. Hopefully you don't have to drive far. But big cities tend to have them. So it's very important to know what format and what deck you should bring to these events, right? Not every LGS is the same. For instance, Friday Night Magic is something that is big in the Magic the Gathering playing community. And with Friday Night Magic, your LGS could hold one of several formats, right? I've seen some do Pioneer. I've seen some do Standard and Modern. I've seen some do Vintage. I've seen some do Pauper, right? Like, it's all depending on what the people tend to want. But for the most part, it used to be Standard a lot, and now it's not. So, kind of have to go from there and see exactly what's, call ahead. Maybe go in there without the intention of playing first and ask what the events are, the regular weekly events are, and you should be able to learn from that. So like I said, it is important to know what format you're playing because certain sets of cards are not able to be played in certain formats. I'll list those as we go over each format here. Just know that it's important to pay attention to ban lists as well as the sets your cards are from, so that way you have a legal deck to play in the specific tournament. Now let's get on with it. Let's begin with the constructed formats, which means that you have to build your own deck before entering the event. So we'll start with the ever so popular, but not really popular anymore, at least near me, it's not really that popular. The standard format. Now this is just a deck box. Standard format. a format that is a 1v1, right? You go against one opponent. It's a 60 card minimum main deck and up to 15 cards in your sideboard. So this is my sideboard. This is my main deck. Your sideboard stays in your deck box, and in between your matches of 3, usually in a tournament event, it is best of 3. And so in that situation of best of 3, essentially in between games, you'll be able to switch out your cards for other things, right? So same deal, right? Concept, like I said, 60 card minimum main deck. You can have more than 60 cards. 15 card sideboard. You can only have a maximum of 15 cards in your sideboard. Games are, like I said, either best of 3 or best of 1, depending on the location or just the people you're playing with. Each game is on average about 20 minutes per game, you know, unless you play Control like a jerk. I'm just kidding. Control's great. Good job, Control. Good job holding the reins of the meta for the entirety of forever. Each player has 20 life, and the goal is to either win by reducing your opponent's life to 0 or by some other win condition available by the cards in the set. So for instance, let's see. There is Angel of Destiny, right? Angel of Destiny is a card. This, for the record, I'm not too sure how legal this deck is in standard right now. I think it's just about to be rotated out. Angel of Destiny. So Angel of Destiny's whole thing is that if at the beginning of my end step, if I have at least 15 life more than my starting life total, each player Angel of Destiny attacked this turn loses the game. So there are cards like this on top of cards, on top of just defeating your opponent and getting their life to 0, right? Normally the life to 0 part is the general idea, but if you happen to be able to win through that method, then that is also cool. You also can only have a maximum of 4 cards, or 4 copies. You can only have a maximum of 4 copies of a card in your deck. So for instance, in this deck, I run 4 copies of Righteous Valkyrie, because it's a boss angel card, and it's amazing. So you can only run a maximum of 4 copies. You can't have any more than that. And you can't have more in your side deck. So, for instance, I can't have 4 in my main deck and then 2 more in my side deck. I can't have that, right? So, for the sake of this, you need to have 4 in between your main and your main and your side deck. Now, the thing with standard, and I'm gonna leave a little graph up here somewhere, hopefully. Standard is played with a continuously rotating number of sets contained within the past 2 years, right? Starting with this year. So for instance, right, I'll kind of go over it, but every September, right around September, 4 of the oldest sets will rotate out to make room for the new sets to be released, which means if you had cards from the older sets that rotated out, you'll need to find replacement cards in newer sets to continue to play that deck. So for example, as of this recording, the sets in the standard rotation are as follows from oldest to newest, which is Zendikar Rising, Kaldheim, Strixhaven, Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, Midnight Hunt, Crimson Vow, Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, and Streets of New Capenna. 8 sets, right? These 8 sets are the standard rotation as of right now. And in September of this year, the release of Dominaria United will rotate out Zendikar Rising, Kaldheim, Strixhaven, and Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, making cards from those sets no longer playable in the standard format. Now, this gives way for several new kinds of strategies to deck building and changes up the meta, so you don't see the same deck over and over and over and over again. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to get rid of all of those cards that are not playable in standard anymore. Let me introduce Pioneer. You'll see that I didn't change my deck at all. So, Pioneer is an up-and-coming format that many LGS are starting to make events for. Pioneer is run in the same style as Standard is. Same rules, right? 60-card minimum deck, 15-card sideboard, 20 life, 20 minutes per game, yada yada. The only difference is that this format is a non-rotating format. So that means that you can have access to every card from the current sets all the way back to Return to Ravnica. So anything from the release of Return to Ravnica and forward as a standard set to Magic the Gathering, those cards are available. Now, again, that does exclude cards that are made specifically for Commander. So any of the Commander Legends Battle for Baldur's Gate cards are not allowed in Pioneer, just the expansion sets. So that is kind of how that works. So while you'll still need to look up ban lists and everything for this, this format does allow for much more customization to deck building and gives you a reason to keep all of those cards that rotated out of Standard. And fun fact, like I said, you'll see that I didn't change my deck at all here, and I probably won't change it for a while, because technically a Standard deck can compete in every one of the formats I'm talking about. And that's the fun fact, because if you wanted to participate in a Pioneer tournament and only have a Standard deck, you can still use that deck in Pioneer, since it does include the newest sets in its list of available cards. Now, this is a great way to get players familiar with some of the older keywords and abilities, and even paves a nice path into our next format, Pioneer's older brother, Modern. So, with Modern, how that works is, you guessed it, right? Modern is exactly like Pioneer, except instead of the list of cards starting at Return to Ravnica, it takes the list all the way back to Mirrodin. Mirrodin was released in 2003, so that's a lot of cards available to you and gives you tons of different ways to tweak your deck to your liking. While there are many budget Modern decks, Modern is known for being an expensive format to get into due to the age of the cards available. Modern also has special sets catered specifically to the Modern format, such as Modern Horizons or even Modern Masters. These sets bring new cards into the Modern format and allow for even further theory crafting. But again, make sure to check the ban list available in order to make sure that you're not making a deck with banned cards in it. Now, even further back in this whole thing, and I'll leave up some examples, if you haven't already seen them, of cards from older sets to kind of give you an idea as to how old we're talking here, right? You got to remember, Magic the Gathering has been around since 1993. So a lot of cards have been printed. It's almost coming up to its 30-year anniversary. So a lot of cards have been printed in these past 30 years. A lot of sets have been printed. So it is very, very important to realize that there's a lot of different cards and a lot of different keywords, a lot of different abilities. And you got to kind of keep tabs on that. So now, even further back in regards to decks, and I definitely don't have a deck like this, but like I said, you can use one of these decks, any of the decks from the 3 previous formats I have just said, you can use in a Legacy and Vintage format. So further back, we've got Legacy and Vintage. And both of these formats contain the use of every card from Magic's history aside from their respective ban lists. The only difference between Vintage and Legacy is that Vintage has some restrictions on certain cards to keep them to 1 copy between your main deck and sideboard. So, for instance, in Legacy, you can have up to 4 copies of any card not on the ban list between your main deck and your sideboard. But in Vintage, those banned cards, such as Black Lotus, may be restricted to 1 copy, so you can still play them, you just can't have 4 copies of them. Now, this is definitely a very expensive format to get into, considering you have many players with access to cards from Alpha, Beta, Unlimited, even the Four Horsemen sets. Some of these cards can be worth hundreds, if not thousands of dollars, depending on the card. I don't see too many LGS play this format, but every now and again they may do that depending on the amount of players that ask for it. But I personally don't see a lot of it. That's like very high roller level stuff. I mean, you're quite literally, most people tend to be just flaunting their money, but it is what it is. So now sometimes LGS will run other constructed events that have a different flair to their formats. As you can see, right, with Legacy, Vintage, and further on back, right, those sets all kind of had the same general idea, right? 60 card main, 15 card side, look at the ban lists, and only for certain sets, right? But things get a little crazy, and I'm not going to go over every single one, but there are several out there. I'm mainly going to go over the ones that I've seen at LGS near me, and probably more common ones that you all will be playing at some point. So the first one to come through is Pauper. Pauper is a cheaper introduction to Magic and its many sets, because the deck you make in Pauper can only consist of cards that were printed in the common rarity. Let me get a common out for you guys here. Of course, I'm going to have a whole deck full of rares. Give me 1 second. This is a common, right? And obviously, you can check to see when you're buying cards what cards are commons. Some cards, I always thought for a long time it was uncommons and commons. Turns out it's just commons. So, definitely makes it cheaper. So, like I said, the deck you can make in Pauper only consists of cards that were printed in the common rarity throughout all of the Magic sets. So, for instance, if a card was printed in a set as an uncommon, you wouldn't be able to use it. But if that same card gets a reprint in a different set later on as a common, it can be used in Pauper. So the same constructed rules apply as the previous format. Same deal, right? 60 card minimum main deck, 15 card sideboard, 20 life, up to 4 copies of a card between the main and the sideboard. And it's really great because this format makes deck building all the more interesting, considering you can't use any of the super powerful rares or mythics that have been released over the years. Definitely a more fun introduction to something like Legacy, and way, way less costly. I mean, way less costly. I would like to say that it's a great way to start out people in trying to find decks that suit them, because this way you can play a whole bunch of different stuff and see how powerful these common cards are without kind of getting crazy with it, you know? You don't have to buy super expensive rares. You don't have to buy super crazy mythics or anything, and they're crazy extended arts or anything. It's just commons, right? And that adds a little bit to it, right? It's a fun little a fun little thing for people to do. All right. Now we're finally going to move on to the crowd favorite, the most popular format in Paper, and some would even say the entire reason Paper Magic is still being played to this day. It's Brawl. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. It's not Brawl. It's Commander. So, Commander, or EDH as it is sometimes called, is a social format consisting of many different rules compared to the previous formats listed. Your commander is a legendary creature that you choose to essentially lead your army into battle. Your army being your deck. Your constructed deck consists of 100 cards this time. So not a minimum of 60, 100 cards exactly. One card being your commander, which sits outside your deck. And the other 99 cards are your main deck. There's no sideboard for this format, and the kicker is the color identity of your commander is what colors your deck can contain. For instance, if my commander is a blue-green creature, then the color identity of the deck is blue and green. That means that my deck can only contain blue and green cards. Now, they also can contain, because you see the generic mana on there, and normally the generic mana is available, the decks can also contain artifacts that are colorless, such as Swiftfoot Boots, right? So, colorless stuff, you're allowed to have that in there too. So, not every card needs to be blue or green, or not every card needs to be blue, not every card needs to be green, but the only cards you can have in your deck are blue and green cards. Now, for instance, if I had a legendary creature, and my legendary creature it cost blue and green to cast this creature. If this creature had a mana ability down here that cost red, for instance, right? Like 1 red mana. That would make the color identity of my deck blue, green, and red. So you're going to want to pay attention to your mana abilities, as well as these here. You do also have cards that, I don't have one here, you do have cards that do have backsides, right? You can kind of flip them. They have a different card on the back. For instance, Avacyn, Archangel Avacyn, I'm pretty sure. She is white. When you summon her on her front side, she is a white creature. But when she transforms into a red creature. So therefore, your color identity for your deck is white and red. So hopefully that kind of explains a little bit of stuff there. You're going to see a lot of these things as precons, right? Such as the Dungeons and Dragons Adventures in the Forgotten Realms stuff. You're going to see a lot of things that are precons that you will end up getting probably for Commander, right? Just remember that Commander is a completely different thing compared to Standard and EDH, or to Standard and Modern, and so on and so forth. So, for instance, right, this card, Hadama's Climb, is a card that is not Standard. This is from, oh gosh, what is this? Rise of Ixalan? Or Rivals of Ixalan, sorry. This is from Rivals of Ixalan. And that means that this can be used in any format that is allowed to have Rivals of Ixalan in it, right? So that's that. But if you wanted to use this card, Stormtide Leviathan, right? You'll need to make sure that there's a different printing of Stormtide Leviathan. Otherwise, this card will not be able to be used because it's a Commander card. It's a card specifically printed for Commander, and because of that, you have to do that. It's the same deal with AC, right? AC is a Commander card. It is a Commander specific. I do not believe AC has had a printing outside of it being a Commander card. So therefore, you couldn't run 4 AC of the Tyrant Strait in your Modern deck or your Pioneer deck because it is a Commander card. So keep that in mind when you are looking for things, because that is very important, right? So, on top of Commander being limited to its color identity, right? Commander also has its own special zone, right? Now, that zone can be here. That zone can be here. That zone can be wherever. But there's a special zone for Commander called the Command Zone, right? So the Command Zone is a brief example, right? You, during any point of the game, as long as you have the mana, are able to summon your commander from the Command Zone, right? You don't have to search your library for it. You don't have to get it from the graveyard. You don't have to find it in exile. You don't have it in your hand to play or to cast. you can cast AC from the command zone, right? Now AC costs four generic, 1 green, and 1 blue, right? So 6 mana altogether. So let's say something happens with AC. Let's say somebody murders this thing, right? It doesn't have an ability that gives it hexproof or anything. So if AC gets murdered, AC gets murdered. What will happen is what murder does is it destroys target creature, right? So you take this creature and it technically goes to the graveyard. But at the time it reaches the graveyard, a state board action occurs, and you can choose to either leave AC in the graveyard or put them back in the command zone to summon later. So most people tend to put it back to the command zone because your commander is a very powerful creature in your deck. But I'm sure there are some decks in which it'd be like, okay, cool, we can leave it here. And the whole reason you would even possibly leave it in your exile or in your graveyard, or if it gets put back to the top of your deck, or if it gets brought back to your hand or something along those lines, is so you don't pay the commander tax. Now, what commander tax is every time AC gets destroyed or sent away from the field after being cast, right? And you bring it back to the command zone, AC gets a commander tax on it, right? The commander tax is 2 generic mana, which means that if I wanted to summon AC again, AC does not cost 6 mana anymore. AC will cost 8 mana to summon from the command zone. If I get AC out again after spending 8 mana to get AC out, and AC dies again, or is brought back to my hand, or something along those lines, right? And I bring it back to the command zone, AC will cost 10 to summon. So you're gonna want to keep a good. You're gonna want to keep a tally on how many times your commander has been sent to the command zone. Now, some people, what they'll do is they'll bounce it back to the hand, right? If they bounce it back to the hand, for instance, let's say I cast AC for 6, and then somebody unsummoned AC, right? AC comes back to my hand. Instead of putting it back to the command zone, I could have it in my hand. Now, you have a risk of doing that, right? Because when you summon AC again, you can summon AC from your hand for its mana cost. So it's still your commander, but it's summoned from your hand. Now, if somebody then has AC go from your hand to the graveyard, like they make you discard a card and it's your commander, you don't get this to go back to the command zone, if I recall correctly. Obviously, in the comments, if I'm wrong, let me know. I've never run into that situation personally, but that is something that I'm sure is the case. So usually most people will bring it back to their command zone, right? So another neat thing to note in Commander is that in Commander you have 40 life instead of 20 life. So that is because, you have more cards and you are playing against 3 other people. Remember when I said it was a social format? Usually Commander is played between 3 to 5 people, but usually 4, right? Usually it's 4 people. That's called a pod. And it's usually making alliances, getting very political about stuff, right? So that is why there's the introduction of 40 life and so on and so forth. But the really cool thing about Commander is a fun little deck type that I like to play every now and again. And this is kind of going further into explaining the format, but this is just something you can understand. One of the rules that is kind of unspoken, but hopefully you'll find out quicker than anybody else, or you'll be watching this video and you'll know. With Commander, there's this thing called Voltron, right? Now, you're not building a giant robot and attacking your opponent with said giant robot. That's not what Voltron is in this situation, right? What Voltron is it's a deck type that you can have to where your essential goal is to make your commander deal the damage, right? Your commander deals damage. When your commander deals damage to an opponent, that opponent takes commander damage. And when an opponent has taken 21 commander damage from one commander, specifically like one of the same commander. So this, like AC needs to deal 21 damage to an opponent. And if AC can successfully deal 21 damage to an opponent, then you win. That's how it works. You don't have to deal 40 damage. As long as you deal 21 damage with AC, boom, you win. So that's another alternate win condition that you can get kind of in Commander. But generally, it's a little bit, not too many people are doing that specifically because there's hundreds of thousands of ways to play these decks. Cards from all over Magic's history can be used in Commander. Obviously, you need to check ban lists and so on and so forth, but for the most part, every card can be used in Commander. And did I mention the most important part about Commander is that you can only have one copy of each card in your deck. So, like all the other formats, you can have up to 4 copies of a card. But in Commander, it is a singleton format. And in a singleton format, you can only have one copy of each card of the same of its name. So for instance, the Tromocratus can only have one in this deck. The Jal Primal Tide can only have one in this deck. The only time that rule does not apply is when you are playing with cards that specifically say you can have any number of this card in your deck. Rats tend to do that a lot. Rats will essentially, there's, I lost the name of the rat card, but Relentless Rats, I'm pretty sure. You can have multiples of it. So you can have like 10 copies in your Commander deck. Obviously, those are very specific things if you're building a deck specifically around cards like that. But for the most part, you just got to realize you need to have one copy of each card in your deck. So very, very important. But that's Commander. Commander is very, very fun. It's definitely the most popular format to come to Magic. It's been around for a long time, at least almost a decade at this rate, probably more. And people love it. It's a lot of people only play Magic specifically for Commander. A lot of people just love it. They just love it, right? I'm a big fan of it, but I don't often have people to play with. So, it's sad. What is that? The tiny violin, right? Playing the tiny little violin. I don't often have people to play with, so I don't get to play Commander a whole lot. But I do also like to play things a little bit more competitive. Commander is kind of a more fun, social, like board game-esque kind of game. But it can get competitive. It's just like the same kind of nonsense that really makes it competitive, and so there's a lot of extra. We'll make a whole video on Commander if we really need to. So that's pretty much it for the constructed formats that you might see at your LGS, but I'm not quite done yet. I know you guys, hopefully you aren't tired of hearing my voice yet. But I do have a couple limited formats to include in this list that you'll definitely see at your LGS as well. Now, limited means you are confined to just one set to make a deck out of on the spot with just the cards you open from packs. No thinking ahead and buying all the cards to complete your deck. It's all on the fly and really tests your deck building knowledge. So the first one is sealed format. So sealed is the format you will play for pre-release when a new set comes out. You're usually given 6 booster packs, and you must build a 40-card deck on the fly using only the cards you open from those packs. And your sideboard consists of any card you didn't put into your main deck, and lands and tokens are usually supplied for you from the LGS to build your deck. So usually it's anywhere between, like, depending on what you're building, usually you have like 13 to 17 lands in your deck, and then the rest are cards that you pulled from these packs. And sometimes people will not look at spoilers for the set and go in blind, while others will study every card in the set before a pre-release and come up with a plan before they even open their packs. So the floor is yours to use your deck building skills to create something to rise to the top and defeat the other players at the event. Again, your life total is at 20, and with the right cards, your opponent's life total can be 0 before they know it. It is very difficult compared to Constructed. This is essentially, limited formats are a net decker's nightmare. Net decking is a term that means if you're, let's say you don't have any creativity because you're brand new to the game, right? Not that you don't have creativity, but you don't have, like, an idea of what these cards do. But you want to play a deck that does damage really fast. Your friends might tell you to go make a red deck. So you might look up the format that you want to be a part of, and you might go and look up the best red deck in 2022. And then you're given a deck list, and then you go, okay, cool, I'm going to buy all these cards, and then I'm going to use this deck at the tournament that I'm going to at my LGS, and that's how I'm going to be playing it. That is what net decking is. There's nothing wrong with net decking. I personally net deck myself because I don't have access to all the cards to, like, formulate plans. I also don't have time to think that hard into creating a deck yet. So I net deck every now and again, but I also just like to be, I like to bring a little creative splash into it every now and again, right? Net deck to get the general idea of the deck's mechanics down, and then add things to it, add and remove things to it as I go. But like I said, limited formats are a net decker's nightmare because you don't have a list to go off of, right? You don't have, you're not guaranteed these cards in these packs. So you can't just go, okay, cool, well, this one guy won a sealed tournament with this deck. I'm just going to look for these cards and then make a deck out of that, and then we'll be good. Like, no, that's not how that works. Unfortunately, that is not how that works. So it is a very difficult thing, but a lot of times it's just a nice introduction to the set. So the final format we'll be talking about today is Draft. But I'd first like to thank all of you for making it this far. Please, please, please like the video. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already for more information like this. I like to bring whatever knowledge I have of Magic the Gathering to the world, as well as other TCGs too. So hopefully this has been helping you. Now, Draft is another limited format where you're stuck making a deck on the fly with just what you get out of booster packs. Except for this format, you're sharing packs with other players while you build your deck. Draft can be played anywhere from 2 to 8 people, and the idea is that you're given 3 booster packs out of this draft booster box. You open one pack, choose a card from that pack, don't show your card to the other players, just make your own little stack, then pass the rest of the cards to the player to your left. You'll then take the cards from the player to your right when they're done choosing their card. You'll then take one card from that pile that you got from that player to your right, and then the cycle continues until all 3 packs are opened and distributed as such. Then, with what cards you've chosen, you'll make a 40-card deck again. Lands and tokens, again, are usually provided by an LGS, but if you're playing with friends at their house, it's best to just have some lands on hand. They may have some, you may want to bring some. It's just a general idea. There is a specific algorithm to drafting that can help you get a decent deck and kind of have a general idea of a better win rate. But that's for another video. Again, the life total is 20, and you'll go around facing your fellow players until one is crowned victorious. Draft is a fun way to experience a set in its entirety, and the format is fantastic for parties. Like I said, much like Commander, Draft is very much so a party format, right? You and a bunch of friends get together, you have a couple drinks, you open some packs, right? You make a deck out of 40 cards and you face each other with them, right? It's a fun little thing. So it's a nice party element to this. If you're ever wondering, if you get a bunch of nerds in the same room together and you want to do a draft, right? A draft box usually costs about $100 depending on what box you're drafting. And you can just draft that. So it's very fun thing to do. But that's pretty much the end of the video. I hope I covered everything in detail that players new and old can grasp what these formats are and how they're played. If any fellow Dragon folk would like, I can make a separate video on each format for more detail. Just let me know in the comments down below. So thank you again so much for watching. Check out our Patreon in the description for chances at box breaks, box battles, giveaways, more stuff. We're obviously a growing channel, so I appreciate all of the assistance and support that I could possibly get from all of you. So until next time, please make sure to drink your water, eat your vegetables, and don't be a dick. And I'll see you all on the next one. Nerd out.